Hearthstone Titans Druid class card review, fast and accurate. We're kicking things off with Embrace of Nature. This is the Druid Forge card, a 1-mana spell. Draw a choose one card. Forge, it has both effects combined. When I think about the Forge cards, I'm always thinking it's going to be better to spend 2 mana to forge a card than it is to hero power. And I think for Druid, unless you're specifically running the hero power package, sometimes you're going to want to be able to spend 2 mana just to be able to spend your mana effectively on each turn. And this would be a good option to be able to spend that 2 mana. Some of the Druid choose one cards, very powerful if you're able to play both effects. Off the top of my head, I think about something like Nourish. And important to note here, it is a nature spell. I think you can definitely find room to fit this in a nature Druid and potentially maybe even something a little bit more aggressive. Forest Seedlings, 1 mana, summon 2 1/1 saplings, blossoms in 2 turns. Blossom is a new mechanic coming to Druid in Hearthstone Titans. What this means is that once the card has been in your hand for 2 turns, it's going to upgrade. So after it's in our hand for 2 turns, it upgrades into Forest Blossoms, and it's going to summon 2 2/2 Treants. I really like the card. I feel like this is going to fit perfectly in a spell-based Druid. You're not totally upset if you have to pay 1 mana for 2 1/1s early in the game, but if it does blossom and you can spend 1 mana for 2 2/2s, then you're probably going to be pretty happy. I like the card. A lot of upside there. Lifebinder's Gift, a 2 mana spell. Choose one to get 2 random nature spells, or reduce the cost of spells in your hand by 1. I think this card is potentially one of the strongest cards that we've seen revealed so far. Being able to mass discount your hand in a spell Druid deck is going to be really, really powerful. I really, really like the card. It's a nature spell. I think it definitely goes into a nature Druid deck, which is largely going to be a spell-based deck. Very, very high on this card. I think it's great, and I think it's going to see an absolute ton of play. Conservator Nymph, a 3 mana 3/4 battlecry, transform a friendly Treant into a 5/5 Ancient with Taunt. And we're going to see that the Treant archetype is getting more support in this expansion. I think potentially this card could fit into a token Treant Druid aggro deck. Being able to pay 3 mana for a 3/4 on the board and then upgrading a Treant into a 5/5. It seems like you're getting a lot of value for 3 mana here. So in a specific deck, I think this card could be good. Frost Lotus Seedling, a 3 mana spell. Draw 1, gain 4 armor. Again, a nature spell, and it blossoms in 3 turns. And you can see after 3 turns, it becomes draw 2 and gain 8 armor. Again, I like this card. It is just a little bit expensive, but keeping in mind that we could potentially discount the cost of this in a couple of different ways with the Druid class. And certainly being able to draw cards, and it has a defensive effect with the armor. I do like the card. I don't think it's great, but I do think it's good. And again, I can see playing this in a nature Druid spell-based deck. Disciple of Eonar, a 4 mana 4/4 battle cry. Your next choose one card has both effects combined. Again, choose one cards having both effects combined can be very, very powerful. The problem with this card is that it's attached to a 4 mana 4/4 body, so we don't necessarily care about the 4/4 that it's putting on board. And so 4 mana is pretty expensive to be able to get both effects of a choose one card. So I'm a little bit concerned about putting this card in a deck. I think it's going to be definitely worth trying, but keeping in mind we've seen effects like this in Hearthstone before, and when they get to be a little bit too expensive, they're really just not good enough to see play in a deck. Ancient of Growth, a 7 mana 5/5, choose one, summon 3 2/2 Treants, or transform your Treants into 5/5 Ancients with Taunt. I feel like with this card, it's a little bit too expensive at 7 mana. If you're playing a ramp Druid, I don't think you're going to be playing this specific 7 mana card. And so if you're playing a more Treant, aggro-based Druid deck, again, specifically this card at 7 mana, maybe a little bit too expensive. Upside for the card, though, it is 7 mana, but it is kind of like a board in a box if you're just trying to get minions back on the board. And then if you somehow find yourself with a board of 2/2 Treants, being able to get down the 5/5 and increase those Treants to 5/5s and giving them Taunt could be pretty strong. So again, I think the card is probably a little bit too expensive for the archetype it's intended to support. Cultivation, 8 mana spell. Give your minions +2/+2, cost 1 less for each Treant you've summoned this game. And I think with this card, potentially, you're really just using it as a way to be able to buff an existing board and close out the game. Likely going to be used as sort of like a Bloodlust effect. And again, because it's going to be costing less for each Treant summoned this game, you're never really going to pay the full 8 mana for it. So I like the card. I think it's going to go well in support of the package that it's intended for, the Treant package, and I do expect this card is going to see some play. Freya, Keeper of Nature, 8 mana 4/6, choose one, duplicate your hand, or summon copies of all other friendly minions. I don't really like the card. At 8 mana, I feel like at this point, its only ever option to see play would be in a ramp Druid, but as a ramp Druid, I don't think you even really want to play this. You look at the text, and it sounds pretty powerful being able to duplicate your hand. and it sounds powerful to summon copies of all your other friendly minions. But with it being 8 mana, we're going to spend our entire turn doing this, so the only way you can ever actually play this card in a game is you have to be ahead. Either you're ahead, you know you're not going to be dying or taking a lot of damage from your opponent, so you duplicate your hand, or you're way ahead because you have lots of minions on the board, or you have a significant board presence, and then you're just going to copy those minions for 8 mana and get the 4 or 6 down. So I feel like this is the type of card that just never is going to see play in Hearthstone because you have to be so far ahead already. It feels like basically anything you do would be just as good or maybe better as far as closing the game out and being able to win at that point. So I don't expect the Legendary to really see play. And then we're going to round things out with ENR the Lifebinder. This is the Druid class Titan. And you can see after this uses an ability, summon a 5/5 Ancient with Taunt. And the abilities are Fill Your Hand. So we've got some nice card draw potential with this. Bountiful Harvest, an actual Reno effect. And then we have Flourish, Refresh Your Mana Crystal. Again, aggressive Druid decks, they're not going to be able to play this. 10 mana is going to be way too expensive. But specifically in Ramp Druid, I think this is going to be played in every single Ramp Druid deck, simply because it's a good way to potentially be able to stabilize. You know, you heal your hero back to full, you put a Taunt in the way, you still have the Ancient that they're going to want to deal with before you get potentially other Ancient abilities, or rather Titan abilities, to be used in that game. So the Druid Titan, I think, really good in specifically Ramp Druid, and not good in those more aggressive Druid decks. For the Theorycraft, I wanted to focus on a Nature Spell Druid deck. Of course, this deck is going to revolve around Topior the Shrubagazer and being able to maximize this effect by being able to put those 3/3 rushers on the board. You're also going to notice that I've splashed in a Treant package as a way to help be able to potentially fight in the early game, and ways to potentially be able to close out the game. Typically with a deck like this, we would want to mulligan for ramp. We want to be able to ramp up so that we can begin spending more mana than our opponent. And we're really looking to get down here and start playing some of our more powerful cards as early in the game as possible. Taking a closer look at the list, 2 copies of Aquatic Form. It's just really strong. Feels core in every single Druid deck. Innervate, a nice nature spell with a little bit of mana cheat to support Topior. Dozing Kelp Keeper actually making the cut here. Sometimes with these Ramp Druid decks, you can get in trouble in the early game against aggro decks, and potentially the Kelp Keeper can give us a way to be able to fight back against that a little bit so that we're not taking too much damage. Embrace of Nature, of course, again, nature spell here. If we have time to forge this and be able to draw a choose one card with the combined effects, that's going to be really strong. Keeping in mind here, when you play a card like this, we want to be very selective about what choose one cards we're going to be playing. Forest Seedlings making the cut. Again, if it blossoms in our hand, it's going to be able to summon Treants as part of the Treant package. If we have to, we can just play it on turn 1 for a couple of 1/1s. Again, being able to fight for that early game board and not take too much damage as we look to start ramping. Planted Evidence, it's going to be a little bit of Discover, a little mana cheat, and a nature spell, perfect for this deck. Witchwood Apple, again, it's a nature spell and Treants, supporting our overall game plan of the Treant package and the nature spell package. Lifebinder's Gift, a nature spell. This card is insane. Again, I think it's probably one of the strongest cards in the set. It's going to fit perfectly into a spell-based deck like this, and potentially creating additional nature spells to fuel the Topior. Natural Causes making the inclusion here. Again, it's a nature spell. It summons a Treant. It's a little bit of damage that could go face, likely just used for removal, but supporting our overall plan. And 2 copies of Solar Eclipse, nature spell, and being able to cast some of these spells twice could potentially be game ending, especially when we look at some of the higher costed spells a little bit later on in the deck. Frost Lotus Seedling, it's a little bit of card draw, a little bit of defense in the form of armor. I think it's good enough to make this, and of course, a nature spell for Topior. Plot of Sin, again, Treants with a nature spell, perfect for our deck. I decided to make this a Renathal deck. I really like the idea of a 40 card deck here, so of course, Renathal has to be included. Wild Growth for the ramp, as you would expect. 1 copy of Disciple of ENR, not totally sold on this card. Potentially you cut this, potentially you play 2 copies. Being able to get both forge effects, certainly very strong with the select forge cards that we have included in this deck. Just not sure that spending 4 mana on this is going to be the best possible play here, so we start with 1 copy just to test and see how it goes. But of course, if you play this on 4 into Nourish on 5, it's going to feel insanely strong. It's just going to be the times where, you know, you don't really want to play this. It's just too expensive for what you're trying to do. Wildbloom Seedsman, of course, it's drawing us a nature spell, and it's going to be ramping. Nourish, again, that's pretty straightforward. 2 copies of Summer Flower Child so that we can draw and potentially discount some of the more expensive cards in the deck. Drum Circle making the cut here really is a way to be able to hopefully close out the game with the buff. Potentially we can summon a board full of Treants if we need to discount the Cultivation, again, as part of the Treant package here. So Drum Circle, again, I think definitely making the cut as a finisher or potential setup for a finisher. Topior we've already spoken about. Cultivation here, this is the Treant payoff card, We're never going to be paying 8 mana for this. Likely it's going to be free or very, very cheap as a way to be able to finish off the game. I like having that option in the deck. And then rounding things out with the Druid Titan. Again, I think the Druid Titan is perfect for a Druid deck that really wants to do a lot of ramping here. That is going to do it for the Druid class card review and the Theorycraft. If you've enjoyed this review, don't forget to like and potentially subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Uncorrupt, and good luck out on the ladder.